Good evening, everyone. It's on or about 6:30, so I'll call this land use planning meeting to order by formally recognizing that we are meeting on Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. As settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to be good stewards of this land and thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this place for thousands of years. In particular, we acknowledge the proud heritage of our neighbors from Alderville First Nation and the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte. I have a motion moved by Councillor Anderson, seconded by Councillor Bateman, that Council approve the December 9th, 2019 planning meeting agenda as presented. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion's carried. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest, and if so, please state the general nature thereof. There are none noted. We have no delegations this evening, so we'll move into the statutory public meeting. I have a motion moved by Councillor Anderson, seconded by Councillor Bateman, that Council move into the December 9th, 2019 statutory public meeting at 6:31 p.m. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? The motion's carried. The one item in our statutory public meeting is with regard to a consent application. It is files number B23, 2019, B24, 2019, and B25, 2019. The owner is Gail Grant. The applicant is Ecoview Consulting Services. The location is Part Lot 32, Concession A, Part 1, Registered Plan 39R-13980. And Mr. Ty, by what method and on what date was notice of these consent applications given?
Thank you, Your Worship, members of Council. The notice for these applications was sent by first class prepaid mail on November 22nd, 2018 to all property owners within 60 meters of the subject property. Notice was also circulated to all ministries and agencies that are required under the Planning Act. In addition, a signed notice was also posted on the property.
Thank you, Mr. Ty. And would you please explain the background regarding these consent applications?
Yes, the applications are each requesting the portion of the subject property be severed in order to create 3 new residential building lots in addition to the retained. Each of the severed lots are approximately equal in frontage and lot size, being 112 meters, 110 meters, and all of 4.5 hectares in area. The retained will continue to maintain 210 meters of frontage and will comprise an area of 7.2 hectares.
Thank you, Mr. Ty. Does the owner or applicant wish to make any comments this evening? There's a button on the side. Yeah, right there. Keep going. There you go. Now push the lavender button in front of you. Harder. There you go.
Hello. Hi. My name is Beverly Saunders. I work for Ecoview Consulting. I'm representing Gail Grant, the landowner. Gail may want to speak as well, and we've also brought a consultant who's a licensed agrologist who provided a report in support of this application. So I did want to speak specifically to the planning report that was provided by Landmark Associates. Specifically, there's a recommendation to defer this and asks us and the applicant, the landowner, to reconfigure the lots to 2-acre lots, i.e. residential lots. We disagree with this recommendation. The recommendation is assuming that the lots that we are proposing are intended for residential uses. They are not. We've proposed farms. So we've proposed 11-acre farms. Specifically, we provided a farm viability assessment in support of this application, demonstrating that these are viable lots. viable agricultural lots. So I've brought Bob here to answer questions related to that because I know traditionally an agricultural lot is larger than 11 acres, but we've gone through an assessment to determine that these lots are in fact viable as farms. So the planning report that was provided essentially said that these lots are oversized residential lots and therefore don't meet residential lot policies. But as we've said, these are proposed to be farms and so are not held to those policies. And so we disagree with the position that these don't meet official plan and zoning bylaw and provincial policy. There are some other points that have been put forward in the planning report. Specifically, there were questions about gaps within the environmental impact study, specifically brought forward by the Conservation Authority. These are fairly minor in nature. Primarily, we had recommended a minimum buffer from features adjacent to the property of 30 meters. They simply said there wasn't enough of a justification for 30 meters to be large enough. So we are happy to discuss whether it could be larger than that. They're very large lots, and so there's lots of area outside of those features in order to accommodate the proposed development. The second point was related to endangered species on the property. We're more than capable to meet the Endangered Species Act legislation as a part of this, and so that doesn't really preclude or inhibit this application from moving forward. And then the third point was a statement related to moving these applications forward as proposed somehow inhibits or thwarts, in the words of the planning report, the ability to extend the settlement boundary in proximity to these properties. We again disagree with that position. I've heard no rationale as to how that's the case. And we did provide in our planning justification report evidence that that was not the case and that nothing within this application would inhibit future development. And yet the planning report is saying that we don't meet policy because we will inhibit future development. And so we would ask you to ask your planner or ask us how this would somehow inhibit development in the future. And those are the three main reasons as why it's being deferred and being requested to be 2 acres as opposed to the 11 acres that we have requested. And we disagree with all three of those points. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I also have Bob Clark here to answer sort of the fundamental question of whether these are viable farm lots.
Thank you, Ms. Saunders. So at this stage, we're just seeking your comments, and then I'll open the floor to the public.
Certainly.
I wonder if Mrs. Grant wants to speak now, or would you rather speak at the end when things wrap up? At the end? Okay. All right. So I'll ask if there are persons present who have questions or comments regarding the proposed consent applications. Come on up, Bob. Bob, could you push the lavender button in front of you? There you go.
There we go.
Okay,
thank you. My name is Bob Clark. I am a professional agrologist, and our firm does agricultural impact assessments and farm viability work. As you may have seen if you've read our report, we do, in order to do an agricultural impact assessment, we evaluate the surrounding lands. So we've looked at the current land use within 750 meters of the subject lands, and we determined that only about 8% of those are actually under active grain crops. 3.5% were in hay, and there was about 17, almost 18% were in apple orchards, and the size of those parcels was at the maximum 20 hectares, but there were smaller properties as well. There were no commercial or viable livestock buildings on in the area that we looked at, and the active agricultural use was only 29% of the area. I wanted to comment on the MDS, because we did look at MDS. Minimum distance separation requires us to review the 750 meters and to determine if there are any viable livestock barns in the area. We didn't find any. There were 2 barns which could be used for livestock, but they're not viable livestock operations at this time, and they are on the Grant property. That means that if they were to be used for livestock, they would have to prove that they don't have an impact on adjacent residential properties, and that would require an MDS2 calculation. We've done an MDS2 calculation for one of the barns. It indicates that the adjacent residential areas would restrict the amount of livestock which could take place on those properties. So we feel that we have addressed the MDS issue, which is one of the criteria in looking at the creation of new lots. With respect to the farm viability, we've used information from the Census of Agriculture in 2016. In your municipality, there are, according to the census, 91 farms. 24 of those are involved in food production. And that is a significant number of operations. Vegetable production has doubled since the 2011 census, and the farms in the immediate area are focused on food production. They are growing either fruit, berries, or nuts, and the average size of those is 6 hectares. About 15 acres. There are farms that are growing vegetables. Vegetable farms tend to be quite much smaller, principally because many of those use greenhouses, so they are smaller in size. And the average size here was just about 1.5 acres. So there were 12 of those. And the number of farms under 10 acres was about 10%, or 25%, and 25% were under 70 acres. So if you're of the opinion, and I run into a number of planners who are, that there's a magic number of 40 hectares, our experience, and certainly the census shows that viable farms are not necessarily the 40 hectares that we as planners seem to think is a magic number. We found in our review that that is certainly not the case. And certainly if you're looking at encouraging new farmers, and particularly young farmers who need to have the opportunity to begin a farming operation, having a smaller operation which they can manage, and even if they're involved in off-farm income in order to support that initial farming operation, it's my opinion that this is a very valid form of development and of agricultural development to encourage the younger people to invest in farming operations. And as I've already indicated, according to the census information, smaller farms tend to lend themselves to the more specialized operations, and we're certainly seeing more specialized operations involved in principally food production, and they are supported in this area by the food processing plant that's in Colborne. So there is, in my opinion, an initial emphasis and thrust towards allowing and creating these. Now, I've seen the term hobby farms, and I very much object to that. People who are growing food, I don't feel are hobby farms, and then it tends to be applied to the smaller operations. But I've certainly seen smaller operations who have a very strong investment in agriculture and who are very much committed to that agricultural operation. So in my opinion, the proposal for the creation of smaller agricultural lots is consistent with the trends in agricultural production, particularly in this area, and our review of the area indicates that the creation of these lots will not have an impact on adjacent agricultural land. There's not a lot of agricultural land in the immediate area, and most of it is in the food production. so that this operation and the creation of these lots, in my opinion, is consistent with the policy for supporting and promoting agricultural operations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else present who has questions or comments?
Shall I turn this off?
Please do. Other questions or comments from members of council? Councillor LeBlanc.
Through you, Mayor. I read the Lower Trench report. On the habitat at risk, there was only one station and one study done. Was that because there was rotating crops? Because this habitat for birds is usually when it's a hay field where they can come and feed. When you're growing soybean, corn, which I've seen on this farm grown before. So, and this year it's hay. Does it make a difference? The other one is the tree line to the north, like 20 meters from a woodlot. Nobody's cutting wood or doing anything on the woodlot, and the trip line for the tree is 20-meter buffer. I don't see it. So I just want to know those questions from the Lower Trent, because those are some of their concerns. And the wells, they said there's 6 wells within adjacent close to it. There's also a 6-inch water main that goes right by this thing on Georgina Street, right up to the end of this, that people could tap into and not be using a well water. And the only receiving water and stream that I know was addressed 3 years ago, and that was to the south side of the property, which is very far away from these lots. And somebody can address those questions. Or
Mr. Ty?
Through you, Your Worship, of course, municipal staff were not involved in the preparation of the EIS, nor were we involved with Lower Trent in terms of their review of the EIS. They simply state these concerns or observations, if you will. I believe that the letter also goes on to recommend a deferral for the purposes of allowing the owner applicant or her representatives to clarify the very questions that this councillor is raising.
Thank you, Mr. Ty. Are there any other questions or comments from members of council? Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, thank you for Daryl. Just wondering, what is the zoning is currently then agricultural? Is that correct?
The property is designated rural, hence there is an eligibility for severing of land in that designation. However, the zoning itself is not a front determining factor in determining consent eligibility. So it's all about policy. It's all about the PPS and so on.
Okay.
What is the zoning?
I believe it's rural. I'm not sure.
Well, Mr. Ty's looking that up. Did you have another?
Well, he was just saying that it's all about policy. I was just wondering if he could explain the policy just a little bit so that we understand. Is that okay?
Yes. Pardon me, Your Worship, it's zoned rural as well.
Zoned rural and designated rural under the official plan.
Yeah.
And the Deputy Mayor is asking if you could explain the general policies around lands that are designated rural.
The fundamental issue with this particular set of applications from a planning perspective is that based on our assessment of the applications within the context of the growth plan, the county official plan, and the zoning official plan for the municipality, is that staff are not satisfied that the applications as submitted satisfy that overarching policy framework. Contrary to comments provided, staff do not necessarily agree that a 10-acre parcel constitutes viable agricultural farmland according to the PPS. 10-acre parcel may be considered viable farmland in the Niagara Peninsula, but in staff's opinion, encouraging intensive agricultural uses, such as what this would amount to, immediately adjacent to the urban settlement area is a fundamental concern. The council, in about a week ago, heard from the consultants who have prepared the official plan update, and there was a high level of discussion given to secondary plans. With the preparation of the secondary plan, the planner, the consulting team, the team preparing that secondary plan, look beyond. They look to adjacent vacant lands to determine where future traffic links, street links are going to go beyond the secondary plan area. It's of a higher level, but still there's consideration given. The outcome of the official plan review is that, by and large, the future of Brighton is going to grow to the east and northeast. If you go the other direction, if you go west, you're constrained by an abundance of wetland and environmental features. So to further subdivide this property, in the opinion of staff, is essentially making it more difficult for that secondary plan assessment to be unencumbered when it proceeds at the direction of council, which may be next year.
Councillor Tadman.
Thank you, Mayor. This, as far as I can remember, has always been a viable farm, and I have watched Mrs. Grant's children work on that farm, and I do believe that it was worked before George and Gail worked it. Am I correct in saying that, Gail? Yeah. So we are always worrying about losing our agricultural land, and I see this as a great opportunity. Maybe not a full income for each one of those children, but something to supplement whatever work they're doing. We have an apple orchard right across the street, just up from there. Sure that it borders on the urban, but why would we in any way even consider turning that agricultural land into, in the foreseeable future into building homes? I think we should leave it as agricultural land as it is, and I will be supporting this. Thank you, Mr. Clark. I certainly see how you can see that these lots would be viable as farmland.
Thank you, Councillor Tadman. Any other questions or comments? Councillor LeBlanc?
Through you, Mayor, for Gerald. So the comments that the Lower Trent has here, and let's say the consultant comes back and says, does it, and the Lower Trent says good, would the staff's recommendation still be to stay at 2 acre lots?
The staff recommendation from a planning perspective would not change.
Okay.
Councillor Rowley?
Thank you, Mayor. The representative from EcoView, I just would like a little clarification that some of the inadequacies based on Lower Trent, have they already been have those concerns been addressed? I kind of didn't get some of that. She did make some comment to that. Could I have her explain that again?
She will when I ask for final comments.
Okay.
I see that she's nodding her head, so she'll be able to make final comment.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Councillor Tadman?
Thank you, Mayor, and I think I'm incorrect in stating that until the actual people that are going to be owning those properties, if we pass this, that's when they'll deal with Lower Trent, so I don't even think that's a concern for us tonight.
Any other questions from members of council? Comments? Mr. Tai, when was the application finalized?
The applications finalized. Trying to find the application itself. Bear with me. In October 2019.
And we have 120 120 days under the new regs, or 100, or are we still in the 180 day?
120, I believe.
120?
For zoning, yeah.
So we have 4 months, okay. Could, if we were to grant consent, could we make accessing the municipal services a condition of consent?
Through your worship, the water exists up Georgina, sewer does not. It's contrary to the official plan to allow any property outside of the Brighton urban area to access municipal services.
It's been done in the past. That's all I'm saying. I'm not looking for your comment on it. I know that there were a lot of things done in the past, I know. And the updated OP, these lands, they don't speak to these lands for secondary plans, do they?
That's correct. The secondary plan area in that particular area is west of Georgina, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Does the owner or applicant wish to make any final comments? And I'll actually specifically ask Ms. Saunders to come forward and answer, if she can, Councillor Rowley's question.
So the question about Lower Trent. So I had a conversation with them today because I was circulated on the application on Friday, so there wasn't a lot of time to address those comments. But the primary comments were mostly just ensuring that the study had everything that it needed to have. So one question was about how many site visits happened. So essentially, the consultant that we use does one site visit, says, yes, they exist, and here's our mitigation strategies, but standard practice is to have 2 site visits. However, I spoke to Lower Trent. They weren't particularly concerned about that because we've flagged it as species at risk, and so that's something we'll be required to do at the permitting phase, which is what Mary had spoken to. And then in terms of the other concerns, which was the setbacks from the features to the north and the west and the south, because there's ample room to, say, be 60 meters setback. They didn't seem particularly concerned about that for this consent, but it is something we'll have to hash out for the rezoning application because we will want to rezone those areas as environmental protection. And so that's what we were addressing today. That all said, it's not in writing, obviously, so I understand that there may be a need to get that confirmation from Lower Trent Conservation, but that was the content of that conversation.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up based on that?
Yes, if I could,
Go
please.
ahead.
So based on your conversation today, speaking with them, they were happy with your comment?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, Mayor. My point on addressing these things was they're all minor in nature
Absolutely.
and all easily addressed with one sentence or 2.
That's correct.
That was my point.
Yes.
And I would like to have a recorded vote.
We're not even close to that yet, but thank you. I'll be happy to make sure that happens.
If you don't mind my providing just additional comments, I still don't understand the rationale as how this development proceeding forward would somehow inhibit the future expansion of the settlement area, even if it were eventually to encompass this property, because these lots are large enough that, let's say in the future something happened, which I would argue Gail would say would never happen, but let's say someone did sell it to a developer, these 11-acre lots are still large enough to subdivide, like they're still large enough to develop if you were to choose to do that. So I still don't understand that rationale as to how somehow this inhibits development in the future. So I did just want to say that comment because I've been struggling with that from the beginning of pre-consultation where that was the position that was provided. And then just in general, I think we have demonstrated that this meets provincial policy. We've received comments from Northumberland County who did not object or provide any rationale as to why they wouldn't support this application from an official plan perspective. So I guess I'll leave it at that. But again, if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. And I will, for council's information, open the floor for discussion once I've read the motion, assuming we want to go down that road. Mrs. Grant, as the owner, do you have any final comments? Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Tai, do you have any final comments?
Nothing specific, only that our understanding from Lower Trent was that their concerns were not to be taken as minor. And we relied on their letter very seriously, and we relied on a discussion that we had with Lower Trent staff on Thursday morning.
Thank you. Does council wish to make a decision on this consent application this evening? Getting head nods? Okay. I will read the motion. It has a recorded vote has been requested, Madam Clerk, so we'll go down that road once I've read the motion. Mr. Tai, in the event that this motion is defeated, do you have words around a consent that would be approved with conditions for this evening?
Through the chair, no, I don't. Actually, staff were contemplating that a deferral would be granted, so we would need to bring it back to a future meeting with recommended conditions.
So the motion I'm about to read, members of council, is to defer. If it is council's wish to grant consent this evening and this motion is defeated, it would be wise of us, I think, to provide direction to staff to bring back a motion to approve consent at the next, and that would be for next Monday if possible, at the next council meeting. Otherwise, we'd be approving a consent application without conditions on it, and I'm not comfortable doing that. But let me read the motion, we can have some discussion. Motion is moved by Councillor Bateman, seconded by Councillor Anderson, that this report regarding consent applications B23, 2019, B24, 2019, and B25, 2019 is prepared by the municipal planning consultants be received, and that Council defer making a decision with respect to consent application B23, 2019, B24, 2019, and B25, 2019, thereby allowing the owner applicant an opportunity to consider amending the submitted applications to reflect proposed lots being no greater than 2 acres, as well as addressing the concerns of Lower Trent Conservation Authority. Further discussion. Councillor Anderson.
There was a good question there that I picked up on. In the future, let's say 20 years from now, development spreads out there. What could happen, and what type of environment would it be if for the owners to sever off or sell off their property, their 12 acres or 10 acres, and the growth can happen. And so what's the picture like for that time?
Well, actually, the picture is quite simple. In 20 years' time, you have 4 houses, or 5 houses, 4 houses, and as well, you have 4 individual lot owners, all of which a potential developer would need to contend with. It's not a case of simply they're large lots, so let's just sever off the existing house. You have to design and align future streets through the area, as well as other components of laying out a secondary plan. For example, schools, parkland, and so on. And it makes it that much more difficult. And it could potentially restrict options.
Yeah, the reason I asked that was because what we just went through with the study and the official plan, and that was all addressed as well. So I understand that, and thank you for the answer. I think it's just.
Go ahead. If I might, Mr. Mayor, there's been past comments made by virtue of proceeding with secondary plans, we would be getting away from the piecemeal approach to development. With all due respect, approval of these consents is actually creating another piecemeal.
Thank you, Mr. Tai. Deputy Mayor?
So, as I understand it, the main concern here is that we're taking a large piece of property, we're severing it into 4 pieces in an area where when we grow, because we are continuing to grow, that is the area where the growth would be. Is that the concern, the basis of the concern? And then it creates a difficulty for if there is going to be development. Because as I understand it, every time we're here, farmland is generally, north of the 4-1 and not just in that area, and then more development in this area. Is that kind of where we're where the concern is?
Through you, Your Worship, essentially, yes. The consensus arrived at through the official plan update was that there will be limited additional growth to the west of the Brighton urban area, to the extent that there are additional greenfield areas there. However, future growth beyond the Brighton urban area will be to the east, northeast.
Any further questions or comments? So a recorded vote has been requested. A recorded vote is done so in alphabetical order, starting with the councillor who requested the vote, and that's Councillor LeBlanc, Madam Clerk.
Excuse me, Mayor, but can you read it again? Because I don't know even if the two people that moved it and seconded it want it to read the way it does.
It's moved by Councillor Bateman and seconded by Councillor Anderson that this report regarding consent applications B23, B24, and B25 2019 as prepared by the consultants be received, and that Council defer making a decision with respect to the consent applications, thereby allowing the owner applicant an opportunity to consider amending the submitted applications to reflect proposed lots being no greater than 2 acres, as well as addressing the concerns of Lower Trent. And if the mover or seconder aren't comfortable with the motion, they could withdraw the motion at any time.
So I guess they stand.
Councillor Bateman?
I would like to withdraw it because I am not in favor of deferring it at this time. So.
Very well. Is there anyone who would like to put their name as the mover of that motion on the floor? So I will need a motion to dispose of the report and to offer direction to staff. Councillor Rowley?
That was my question, Mayor, as to if this motion is not on the floor, what would next steps be? How would that motion need to be written? Thank you.
My advice would be to receive the report from the planning consultants and to direct them to bring forward if it's our intent to grant consent, to bring forward a motion or bring forward a motion that shows conditions for granting consent.
Could I put my name behind that, please?
You may.
We could do it right.
And Councillor Anderson, would you be comfortable seconding that?
I'll second it.
There you go. No, you
No,
don't,
you
sir.
lost yours.
No, you don't. You were not the mover. The mover withdrew the motion. Yeah. I was just trying not to put more ink on the paper, but that's we're good.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Go ahead.
We could move right now to grant the consent and with the conditions being brought back next. No, we don't have a meeting next week, do we? Yeah, council meeting.
We have a council meeting.
Yeah. Well, I think Mrs. Grant would sleep better if she knew that it was going to move forward.
So right now, it's to receive the report and direct staff to bring forward a report providing the conditions to grant the consents. Mr. Ty, does that make enough sense to you?
So just so I'm clear, council is proposing to grant the consents, but then just have staff bring back a report with the...
Not according to this motion. This motion says, based on our discussion, this motion says that we're directing staff to bring forward a report that would show us the conditions to provide the consent. Well, we're not deferring. So the last one was a deferral so that the applicant could do as was asked. This is saying we're not asking the applicant to do anything. We're asking staff to bring forward a report that shows what conditions we would have to pass in order to approve the consents. Is that
I understand.
fair enough? Councillor Tadman?
I think we could make it a bit clearer for the applicant too. The conditions would be the normal conditions under any consent mostly. That the taxes are paid and all those kind of things.
There may be additional, based on the county's report and based on the Lower Trent's report, there may be additional consent or conditions that council might want to consider. And it would be appropriate for our planner to help us through that.
Yes.
Okay.
But she can go home tonight knowing that the consent will be granted. There will be conditions, just like everyone else that comes, there is conditions. But they can be a bit different.
I would say anecdotally that might be true. This motion simply has staff bringing back another report. Council has not made a decision based on this motion on the consents tonight.
Yes, and it could get tricky with the conditions. That's why I would like to, I don't necessarily want to support this. I would like to see a motion come forward, and I would move it, but you've already got one on the table, I know that, to grant consent.
I do have one on the table, but as a seconder, you could withdraw.
Oh, I'm very aware of that, and I've done it before. Okay, long as this is coming back next week, I'll stay with this, and then we'll have a look at the conditions, but I certainly hope that the council will support this.
Thank you, Councillor Tadman. Now, Councillor LeBlanc, for your information, the last motion which you asked for a recorded vote on has been withdrawn, so I'm just going to call the vote here. Unless you want a recorded vote.
It's fine with me.
Thank you. So I'll ask for any further discussion on this motion. All in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion's carried. That ends our statutory public meeting with a motion moved by Councillor Bateman, seconded by Councillor Anderson, that Council move out of the December 9th, 2019 statutory public meeting at 7:11 p.m. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Those opposed? The motion's carried. All right. We'll move into planning and development reports. Our first report is, sorry, I lost my spot. With regard to the Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board Long-Term Accommodation Study, Mr. Ty, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight?
Not at this time, Your Worship.
Thank you. I have a motion moved by Deputy Mayor Vink, seconded by Councillor Bateman, that Council receives the report regarding Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board Long-Term Accommodation Plan for information, and the Council directs staff to maintain communication with the Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board regarding accommodation planning in the municipality. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion's carried. And this report was deferred. Mr. Ty, it's with regard to the proposed closure of road allowance Lot 2, Concession 7. We've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight?
Nothing further, Your Worship.
Thank you. I have a motion moved by Councillor LeBlanc, seconded by Councillor Tadman, that the report regarding the partial closure of the noted road allowance as prepared by the municipal planning consultant be received, and the council advised staff, well, I need to know, Councillor LeBlanc, what you'd like to do. The council advised staff as to whether the municipality approves of the road closure, stopping up and conveying the road allowance. Okay, this is what Tim Hortons is for, everyone.
No. Yeah, I go there. Through you, Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead.
Could we make an approachment agreement?
Well, if we don't stop up and close, that would be the appropriate direction. So we could put and direct staff to prepare an encroachment agreement with regard to the property.
There was one other, I don't know if this is the time to ask this question, Mayor.
Until I have a motion on the floor, it's not an appropriate time to ask any question.
Yeah. So for an approachment agreement.
Okay. So now it reads that we receive the report and the council directs staff to prepare an encroachment agreement for this property. That's okay with you, Councillor Tadman? Is there any discussion? Councillor Bateman?
Correct me, Daryl, is that not already in your report where you say in alternative, the staff would suggest council perhaps consider the appropriateness of an encroachment agreement?
Through the chair, yes. It was a comment made in the report for council's consideration. It was not part of the recommendation.
Right, so the recommendation was simply that council make a decision, and our decision is either to stop up and close the road allowance or sign an encroachment agreement with the property owner. Any further discussion? Councillor LeBlanc.
Through your chair, one of the reasons this was deferred from the last council meeting, there was a question asked if there was a building permit, and staff was to get back to see if there was any building permits. So my question is back, what was deferred? It came back here. Did the staff find the building permits?
It's in the report, and the report says that no building permit was found because the building was put up in the 50s.
Through the chair, the former Township of Brighton files revealed no issuance of a building permit. The Ontario Building Code came into play in 1974. Prior to that, various municipalities throughout Ontario and elsewhere relied on the National Building Code. Some municipalities embraced it. Other municipalities just ignored it. There were no permits. We could find nothing, so we went through MPAC, and MPAC, presumably through a site visit at some point, identified the barn as being constructed circa 1950 and in reasonable shape. That's all we could find.
Councillor Tadman.
Through you, Mayor, so obviously if MPAC knows about it, they're paying taxes.
Through the chair, I would assume so, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Anything further? All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion's carried. Our next report is with regard to Lakeside Landing Plan of Subdivision. Mr. Ty, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight?
Nothing at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Ty. I have a motion moved by Councillor LeBlanc, seconded by Councillor Tadman, that council receive the report regarding Lakeside Landing Plan of Subdivision, final subdivision approval as prepared by the municipal planning consultant, and that council receives and approves the draft M plan for lands described as Part Lot 5, Broken Front Concession, as attached to and forming part of this report, and direct staff to sign the final plan for the purposes of registration. That council resolved to receive the approved draft R plan as attached to and forming part of this report, and that such plan be deposited. That council hereby grants final subdivision approval of Lakeside Landing under authority of Section 51, subsection 58 of the Planning Act, and that final approved M plan be registered within 30 days of the date of approval. That council directs staff to forward the subdivision agreement to the owner-developer for execution. The council hereby enact a bylaw authorizing the mayor and clerk to sign the subdivision agreement pertaining to Lakeside Landing, and that council hereby enact a bylaw to remove the holding provision on lands pertaining to the Lakeside Landing Plan of Subdivision. Are there questions or comments from members of council? Councillor Rowley.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor. I've just looked at some of these drawings, and I'm seeing now that I think in previous drawings there were not two exits, but if I read these plans right, there are now two exits onto. I think at one time initially there was just one exit onto Lakeshore, but now there's two, right?
Through the chair, there was always two.
Oh, was there? Okay, sorry. Then I've looked at wrong maps.
Are there any other questions or comments with regard to the motion? I was pleased to see that we've included in the subdivision agreement that the low pressure systems will be well advertised, and that the buyers will be well aware of the potential concerns around that. So that's pleasing. Councillor Tadman.
Yes, and once again, I just want to remind all of council that Chris Angelo, that's the Director of Public Works, I talked to him not too long ago again, and they're working wonderfully in Trenton, and he said it's the best way to go.
Perfect. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion is carried. We have no unfinished business, so we'll move into bylaws. I have a motion moved by Councillor Bateman, seconded by Councillor Anderson, that council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date, being a bylaw to authorize the mayor and the clerk to execute an agreement between the Corporation of the Municipality of Brighton and 952-849 Ontario Limited regarding a plan of subdivisions for certain lands located in Part Lot 5, Broken Front Concession, and comprising Parts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 of Plan 38R 3666 and Part 7 of Plan 38R 2325 in the Municipality of Brighton in the County of Northumberland. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. And I have a motion moved by Councillor Anderson, seconded by Councillor Bateman, that council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date, being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 059-2015 and bylaw number 140-2002, as amended, otherwise known as the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw of the Municipality of Brighton. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. I'll open the floor to question period. If any members of the public have questions with regard to an item that was on our agenda, you may approach and ask that question. Just push the button in front of you, Jim, please. Thank you.
I just wanted to comment on something that Ron Anderson and some of council said on the same committee that I sat on with the official plan review, and I just really think this council has to, this town spent a lot of money, a lot of hours with staff developing that new official plan and where Brighton's going in the future, and I really think you have to take a long, hard look before you make any decisions on tomorrow, instead of, we're trying to look 20 years ahead. And I really would ask that council looks really hard at that. That's really all I have to say. Thank you.
It was an interesting question. Thank you. So I'll ask again and be clear that we're looking for questions from member of the public with anything on our agenda this evening. Anyone? Nope. So we'll take a 10-minute recess before we go into closed session. We're good. It's 7:31. I'll call the meeting back to order. We'll go, our next session is to go in camera pursuant to the Ontario Municipal Act 2001. I have a motion moved by Councillor Tadman, seconded by Councillor Rowley. The council resolve itself into closed session on December 9th at 7:32 p.m. pursuant to the Ontario Municipal Act 2001, as amended, subsection 239(2)(c), a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board, more specifically the sale of Brighton Industrial Park land and land for recreational purposes. And K, a position plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on by or on behalf of the municipality or local board, specifically Lakeview Family Health Team. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried.